If you've ever wanted to add extra light to your wildlife portraiture, this video is for you. I'm going to show you how to add a beautiful backlit atmospheric glow to a portrait of a Maine Coon. My name is Carla Grace. I am a full-time wildlife artist specializing in acrylic and oil paint. I paint realistically with wildlife and I share my entire process on my tutorial platform. You can also see all my tutorials on my new app, which is free to download and makes it really easy to navigate everything that I have available to share with you. Today's tutorial is going to focus on a commission that I did of a really beautifully fluffy Maine Coon and how I created a soft, beautiful atmospheric glow using my acrylic paint. I also show how to balance our warm and cool tones so that we create a vibrant, beautiful white in the fur without having to actually use pure titanium white. So if you'd like to see how I do this using acrylic paint, please stick around for the whole video and I will see you at the end. I'm ready to get started. So this sort of soft golden tone that we've got here that sort of filters in through the whole portrait, I'm going to mix using titanium white, raw sienna, and then I want to mute that down. So you can either mute it down with burnt umber or raw umber at this stage and then adapt it accordingly. So I'll show you the difference between those two. So burnt umber is our red brown and it's quite warm. It's quite beautiful to work with when you're in warm, sunny areas. And you can see how it just straight away pulled down the value and the chroma. And that works really well when you want to sort of keep your tones a little bit more muted, like if you're working with anything similar to this. And so holding that up to the areas on the painting, on the reference photo, we can see we're pretty close. And I like to sort of gauge just sort of roughly, it is quite a warm tone and it's pretty close. So I'm happy with that. But I'll show you what the raw umber does. And I'd use the raw umber in these sort of areas here where we've got a softer gray kind of color. And my raw umber is over here. So I'm going to use that down here. So raw umber has more of a green base to it. And I like to use raw umber in the shadow areas, and just that variation between the burnt umber and the raw umber, you can see the difference between the two colors. So when we bring that one up to the paint, up to the reference photo, you can see straight away that it blends quite nicely into these shadow tones. And you can take this, if you're really gunning for a shadow mixture in the brown areas of your painting, adding a little bit of Payne's gray to this mixture now is really going to push it into this area. This sort of, it's like got this sort of blue undertone. Oh no, I had white on my finger. Luckily, it's just a print off. There you go. So then you've really got that shadow tone that you've got in there. I'm not going to be working that far down the value scale. This is about as far as I'm going to go because I'm going to be focusing on those slightly lighter tones and blending that into the shadows that we've already got. So I'm just going to start using a little bit of this and I'm just going to basically test the color with the painting, what we've got, because it all looks a bit different when you start to work with it on the actual surface. You'll have heard me say before that color theory is just color theory until you actually start working with it, in which case it starts to really change and you have to work according to how it looks on the painting. So this is the right kind of golden color that I'm hoping to get. I am going to need to adapt it depending on the area that I'm working on. So I want to start from the back and then work my way forward. I'm going to start working with these soft glowing areas around the fluffy bits around the edge. And then I'm going to slowly come in to the finer details on the actual face itself. And to do that, so I'm going to need a slightly cooler and lighter. I'll keep the reference here actually while I work on this section. then you can see what I'm gunning for. So we've got a cooler sort of shadow, a light shadow tone. So I'm actually going to hop over to the raw umber, add a little bit more titanium white, and then I'm going to use a little bit of Payne's gray off to the side and just slowly add that to the color mixture. Slowly change the value of it. And now I'm going to experiment and see how it looks. So I'm using my filbert, and when I get to the edge of the marks that I've already created, I'm dry brushing that. So there's a very soft blend of this lighter tone into the surrounding dark areas. And I want to slowly make this lighter because I'm gradually adding the light here. And then what we're going to need to do is then push it back again with some darker tones. So especially where we get here and we've got very, very soft bursts of color, or of light, sorry, that's where we're really going to need to blend all of these layers together. So this is a bit easier to do with oil paint, if I'm honest. Acrylic doesn't make it easy at all. And we're going to also bring in this lighter section here to the shoulder over here. So let's grab a little bit more Payne's gray, and off to the side I'm going to make a slightly darker version. And so I've gone from light, and then now I want to push it back, but I'm blending it into that light. So we're getting this very soft transition. And you'll notice that I've sort of overcompensated with the light sort of areas of the fluff. And then now I'm pushing that back. So acrylic very much relies, like the blending of acrylic depends very much on going over and then pushing it back. And you've got this like overcompensation happening between the layers, where you just overlap them, and that will eventually create this blend between the two. And then you come in again, and it's happening very much at the same time. So it's not like you're having to do the whole thing and then come back later on. You're doing it right on the fly as you're going. So it's very instantaneous. This is very similar with oil paint as well. You don't have to wait a huge amount of time before being able to blend tones together like this. You can just work between your darker mid-range values. And once you've established that balance with your oil paint, then you start bringing in your very, very bright highlights and your very, very dark pure black or pure burnt umber, whatever the tone is that you're working with. Then you can start bringing that in. But I'd establish those mid-range values from dark to light first. Now there's a little flick actually of fur here somewhere. So I'm working very softly with this tiny little filbert. It's not a very aggressive brush pattern at all. And I'm not using it very finely. It's very generic how I'm using it. Slightly on the side and very soft pressure. So there is a very dark patch, much darker here in the reference photo than what I've got there. And that's fine. I just push that back a little bit. So I'm just getting some pure Payne's gray off to the side and just going to add that in there. And then I'm just going to blend that in with a little bit more of the shadow tone. Very, very softly. And now this section here where we've got quite a lot of very, very light, out of focus bits of fur coming into the light, that's where we're really going to need to work on this balance between the background, where we're having that contrast in the background, and then blending it into our actual portrait. And I had mentioned before that there was a little bit more involved with this portrait than just me simply painting a pretty picture of a cat. This is for a long-term. She's been a collector of mine basically for quite some time. And I'm adding a lot of value to her relationship with me because she's expressed interest in buying quite a lot more artwork, mostly through her business. So even though pet portraiture is not something like I'm interested in at all, I'm making the exception for this particular collector because I'd like for her to have this continual interaction with me that will add value to the relationship that we've got, and that in turn will end up in developing more sales in the future. So it's a long game that I'm playing with this collector. We're just building a pretty solid relationship, and so that's why I've made the exception to doing a pet portrait for this particular one. And Leanne's asked a collector question. Did this collector give you a choice in photos to paint, and did they take them themselves? Did you just get this option? By luck, was it perfect? So they have 3 cats, and this was one of the photos that they sent through. And I said, yes, more photos like this of the other ones. The other photos that they sent through of their other cats were not like this at all. So this is the only one that I was like, I'll paint this one because it's a great photo. Please redo the other photos. And so they're doing that. They live in a different part of Australia to me, so I'm not able to help them with those images, but they got this one right. So they're trying to take similar photos and send those through. So we just wait and see. They're thankfully not on a time crunch for these paintings. So we just wait, but they know what to do for the reference photos. So thankfully they're good quality. They're taken with a phone, but a new phone, thankfully, and they've turned out really well. If the photos were bad, I would have said no to the commission. Right, so this area is going to require a few more layers to really push back and forth between the light and the dark, then blend that into that dark section. But I'm going to move on to a different section just for the sake of variety in this live demonstration. So you can see that it just requires some gentle layers and some back and forth, but we're basically blending into both the background and the fur as well. And we'll be doing the same when it comes to the soft glow around the ear as well. So I'll be adding a soft layer of extra light that just sort of diffuses. It's not perfect, but it just diffuses softly into the surrounding paint. And the same with this top layer up here. So I'm also going to be doing that on this side here, where we've got the fur that's almost overexposed by the backlight. And that's going to be from here. I'm not going to try and change that glow too much. Just soften it, and you can blur it with your fingers by adding the paint there and then just sort of like dragging it. And that creates that soft blend. So I don't want hard outlines for this particular commission. So this color that I'm using to create the glow is actually darker than that bright highlight that we see. The slightly darker just creates the bit more of a glow. So it's also got a little bit more color in it compared to the light, the light that we're seeing on top here. And that's also, so that warmth of this color that I'm using to blend the edges is going to be set off against the slightly cooler white that I use here as the highlight. So I'm playing off the warm and the cool again, just to create that depth in the colors and the vibrancy in the white, mostly because it's a white tone. Just checking the reference. And the rest here is pretty soft focus. I just wanted to soften those edges and then bring in this warm tone now through here. And I'm pretty much just dry brushing this detail in. It's very easy to try and make the final details that we add as clear as possible. And I want to just encourage you to, you don't have to always make detail super clear in order for it to be an effective finish. Sometimes the most effective finish, especially when you're doing soft fur, is to make that detail actually a soft focus finish. And you do that sort of through this gentle blending of the light. So these lighter tones that we're adding now are kind of like that final touch of light. And using my finger to blend it in really helps as well. So obviously the lower that I go on this portrait, the less finished it is. So I'm going to look now at the light over here and go back up because those are the more finished parts of this portrait. And I'm going to switch my brush over to my round size 0. So this is more detail focused. And I'm going to use my shorter bristle for shorter fur. And I'll use my liner, which has got a longer sort of bristle to it, for doing things like the whiskers and things like that. And I'm going to thin down the paint a little bit more as well and bring in some more white. So I'm not going to try and struggle through this using thicker paint. I'd rather do more layers of a thinner, more transparent version of the paint than trying to get as opaque as possible in the first application. So I'm going to work with a more smooth brush stroke rather than the more opaque version. So the thicker the paint is, the more opaque it will appear. And I don't necessarily want that. I want these strokes to be as smooth as possible. And I'm literally just adding this in a very generic way, just to soften this shadow tone that I've got in there. And we've got some shorter hairs coming down across the eye, and they kind of disappear into the shadows. I'm not really trying to get it exact, as you can tell. I'm just kind of adding it, using the reference more as a guide. So now that I've got the base of those lighter bits of fur, the lighter whiskers coming in over the eye, I'm going to blend it in a little bit. And I'm also going to soften the expression by bringing down some fur across the eyelid here rather than having it completely open and rounded. Just want to soften that look to the eye. And now I'm going to grab a little bit of this darker Payne's Grey shadow mixture over here. I'm going to thin it down because now I want it like a glaze. So I'm going to add a fair bit of that airbrush medium, or if you've got a different medium that you're using, that's fine too. And I'm going to roll that paint off my brush, dab it away. So there's a very small amount of that that color on my brush. And now I'm going to go over these whisker lines and push them back a little bit. So it's only parts of those whisker lines that are catching the light. And you can see that here in the reference photo. They've got quite a lot of shape to them. rather than having it pure white and stark. I'm pushing some of the parts of those lines back and allowing other parts to be brighter. And I'm going to grab a little bit of a pure titanium white onto my brush. Very, very, very small amount. I really don't want to overdo this bright little touch of light. And as you can see here, we've got a very, very bright kick of a reflection on one of the hairs, which will be this one here. And so I'm just going to add a little bit of that light there, very, very gently. That will do it. All right, happy with that. All right, so I'm going to go back here to my warmer sort of light tan tone, and I'm just going to bring it in. Now there's this area here, which also needs quite a lot more light to it. I'm going to brush back and forth, and then I'll blend that back in as well with a darker glaze. So we're working with those opaque base tones just because we've got a lot of titanium white, and that helps to create that opaque color as well. So a lot of these lines here need to get blended together as well to mimic the soft focus blending here. And we need more light, warm tones in this section here as well to really round that off and make that look a little bit more like the reference photo. So I'm actually going to switch down here to the raw umber because this part here that I'm looking at is a slightly more shadowy area. I'm just going to soften that. So it's still a shadowy version, but I'm just using the tan tone to just kind of bring in that glow and the light. And my finger to blend it in and make that soft focus. Now we're just building up these lighter tones and doing it in a really, really soft way. I'm not trying to create individual hairs, even though I'm using a round size 0. Allowing the brush to actually lie quite heavily on the surface of the painting. So I'm just creating a variety of different size strokes from small to large. And I'm making sure that the marks blend quite nicely to really create that soft finish to the fur. So a few of the marks are more clear than others, and they just sort of, there's a lot of variety in the marks that I'm making. And so I'll just continue to sort of build that area up with some lighter tones, and then I'll bring in a few darker areas and really enhance that back and forth. So the main thing that I want to add now is this whisker that streaks all the way up, and I'm not going to use this short brush. I'm actually going to switch over to my liner, and the liner just holds more paint and it allows for a longer stroke rather than the short, which is great for short strokes, simply just because of the amount of paint that it holds. And I'm going to start that whisker line with a slightly darker mid-tone rather than using a very bright highlight. So this mid-range value that we created at the start, and I'm using the shadow area sort of base tone, and I'm thinning it down quite a lot so that I get a very, very smooth stroke. And I'm going to get as much paint off of the brush as possible, especially if it gathers too high up, then it's going to be a very uneven stroke. So I'm going to roll that around in the thinner section here that I've created of the paint. It sort of ends up all over the place. And so now it's very evenly coated on that liner. I'm trying to find to show you. There's no blob or lump of paint at all. And so now I'm just going to find the starting point and then the end point. So starting here-ish, ending up here. So I need to adjust my hand according to how that stroke is going to look, and then just go for it. Don't worry about the perfectness, like how perfect it looks. One stroke and then stop. If it doesn't come out perfect the first time, don't worry about it. We're going to add a little bit more white. Obviously, it doesn't have to go exactly where it looks in the reference photo. It's just a guide. So I'm going to rinse off that cooler shadowy version now, and I'm going to use, I just dropped a dollop of water on that. Thank goodness it's acrylic. And now I'm going for this warmer highlight tone. Thin it down. The key for creating these nice, long, smooth, even strokes is to really thin that down and make sure you've got a very even application or even carry of the paint across that bristle. Make sure there's no droplets, so just tap it and turn it. You'll see that I'm kind of rotating the brush like this as I tap it. And now I want to look on the reference photo where the brightest parts are. I don't want a bright start. I don't want the section down at the bottom to have a bright lump of white. I want it to be brighter up to the top. And so what I'm going to do, now my angle is a bit funny here, I'm going to start further up on the whisker rather than at the base. And then I'm going to just taper that in once I've done the full stroke. So let's do that. Full stroke. And now that there's less paint on the tip of my brush, I'm just going to softly feather that in. Now, if you go off the whisker at all and you end up with an uneven finish to that whisker, wait for it to dry. It's not the end of the world. It happens just about every single time to me because I have wobbly hands. And go for your darker tone. So look on the painting, what's underneath it, and just go for that slightly darker tone. Keep it on the tip of your brush. You don't need a big amount of it. And then just simply really, really lightly correct that. You don't need to overdo it. Worst comes to worst, you can just paint over that section and then redo it. And I'm just going to grab a little burnt sienna, create a little bit of a tan shadowy tone just for this section here. And then I'm going to leave it as that. So that's the whiskers. So basically I'll be doing that to most of these fine details that I bring in at the end. But I do need to bring in a softer finish to what I've created around the ear here, which is what I was doing in this section, and bringing in some slightly lighter strokes. And then I will be, oh, look at this reference photo, it's getting worse and worse. And then I'll be doing the same for the whiskers down here. Now that's the same process as what I did for this one here. So starting with a slightly darker tone and then bringing in the lighter parts of the whisker as I go further down on the painting.
So that's the process. That's how I would do it.
Thank you for joining me in today's video. I hope that you got something useful out of it to use in your artist practice. If you would like to see a full free tutorial on my brush control and how I create realistic wildlife effects, then please see the description below or head over to my tutorial platform or download my free app. It is there for you to make the most of. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video.